Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. Viewers, Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs have sent the stock markets worldwide into a tizzy. After a massive Wall Street meltdown on Friday, the Asian markets nosedived. The situation in India is no different. Investors in India are witnessing a sea of red. There's a bloodbath on Dalal Street. Sensex opened with a cut of almost 400 points. The Nifty 50 shed close to 1,000 points in the morning, and the Sensex closed at 2,226 points lower with a cut of 2.95% at 70,137. Nifty closed at 742 points lower, down 3.24% at 22,161. That's the kind of numbers that we're talking about as far as the two indices are concerned. But let's also tell you about what some of the reasons for the global market crash that wiped out $6.4 trillion in just about 12 hours are. The worst hit nations were, of course, Hong Kong. If you can quickly bring that graphic up on the screen, including Hong Kong as well as Taiwan, amongst the Asian markets as well as Singapore, that were amongst the worst hit that as far as this particular graphics are concerned, as this particular markets are concerned. We're also taking you across to the reasons for this bloodbath, which is the worst opening since the March of 2020. The reason is that Trump tariffs on 60 countries that have been announced. Also, we're looking at a situation where China's 34% retaliation came out as well. And we also saw the reason of recession fears in the US that have been expressed. There's also the entire aspect of a trade war, which is now escalating, the fears of which are now escalating as well across countries. And Donald Trump, in fact, talking about a retaliation as far as China is concerned. India is also following Asian peers, is really the view over here. We've seen how Hang Seng has been down by 10%. The Nikkei has been down by 7% as well. Now, amidst all of these global market crashes, Donald Trump has said that there's no inflation. Oil prices and food prices are down. And in fact, he came down heavily on China's 34% retaliation too. Let's take a look at what Trump has said. Now, Trump has come out to say that as far as his market meltdown is concerned, there's no inflation to speak of. Oil and food prices are down, he says. Long time, the abused US has now started bringing in billions of dollars as far as these tariffs are concerned. And despite China raising tariffs by 34%, he said that his warning was not acknowledged, and therefore he has now hit back. Let's listen to what US President Donald Trump has said on why the markets are reacting.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Let's take this across to our guests now. Joining us, we have PK Basu, economist, joining us. Adam Schwartz, the political commentator. We also have Vibhuti Jha, ex-Republican candidate, joining us. And Dan Gertrude, economist, also joins us on the panel. Let me start with you first. Vibhuti Jha, Trump is talking about inflation not hitting yet. Isn't it really too early in the day for him to be drawing such radical conclusions? Just look at the way the markets globally are reacting.
Hey, thank you very much for having me over here. Look, it is early times right now. I think many factors would have been taken into account. What will be the impact of it? We are living in a remarkably interconnected world. I recall in 1987, when I was in American Express Bank office in Delhi, when the 87 crash happened, we didn't even feel it. But today, everything is a big news. You remember the story of Thai baht when that collapsed, how the market tanked. So we are now living in a remarkably interconnected world. And I believe that the United States is going to tighten its belt, because we are indeed suffering from a severe case of financial obesity, which is problematic for America right now. We cannot sustain a $36 trillion deficit and trillions of dollars of interest payment. What is happening indeed, as the largest consumer nation in the world, what has happened is the soul of America disappeared when manufacturing went all over the world and left America. That is one of the biggest challenges which Trump recognizes, that manufacturing has to be brought back. And therefore, you find a very interesting coincidence that Modi is also trying to build manufacturing base in India, make in India.
No, I don't think anybody, Vibhuti Jha, in their right mind would, prevent any leader from encouraging domestic manufacturing. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
But the point is how you do it. The point is, if you are obese, then there are different ways to curtail it. You go on a diet, you exercise, you go in for bariatric surgery, or do you stop eating altogether and try the world stops eating altogether. There's a whole
combination of everything.
That.
Combination of everything. That is what is required when you are suffering from extreme fat. That is the challenge which Trump has chosen, elected, in addition to
which he also wants everyone else to stop eating. That appears to be a bit of the problem. Now, we can PK Basu on that. PK Basu, do you agree with this? That, tightening the belt is one thing, but expecting everyone else to stop eating or stop eating at the same pace is what unfortunately appears to be the outcome, because it's an old saying that when the US sneezes, the world catches a cold. In this case, it's much more serious than that.
I think many observers are overreacting to the situation and are exacerbating the market meltdown. But the simple fact is that for 30 years, the world has been dealing with China, which does not operate like a normal market economy. China's approach is to overproduce. And it overproduces, stacks up its inventories, and then tries to dump that excess production on the rest of the world. This strategy is something that should have been called out 15, 18, 20 years ago. In fact, the premier of China in 2007 said, the so-called four no's, China was completely suffering from overcapacity as early as 2007, and yet from there to today, if you just look at, say, steel, China's steel production has tripled from where it was in 2007. It was already the highest in the world by a long way, and it has gone way beyond. Now, what China is doing is globalizing its overcapacity problems.
Right.
And the rest of the world has allowed it to go on for far too long.
Yeah.
Thank goodness Trump is trying to put a stop to it.
All right. And I believe there's a fresh reaction of Trump coming in. I'm sorry, PK, was also interrupting you as well. There's a fresh reaction of Trump coming in. Let's quickly listen into what he has to say as far as the latest tariffs that have been imposed by China and what US's reaction would be. All right, this is what we're told. In fact, all right, we don't have the bite at the moment, but he has threatened additional tariffs on China on Monday, raising fresh concerns that his drive to rebalance the global economy could lead to a trade war. Trump has said that if China doesn't withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, that is the 8th of April 2025, US will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. That's, in fact, the big takeaway coming in. Dan, I don't know if you've heard this bit of news that's just breaking, but this looks like a massive escalation. China and US are going to be engaged in what appears to be a massive, game of one-upmanship. And this isn't really going to benefit anyone if the tariffs are going to go up to 50%.
Well, it's not a great situation. However, if you've studied Donald Trump over the years, it has been far greater than 30 years Donald Trump has been talking about these issues with other countries. He has long stated that the United States has been taken advantage of. He finds himself in a position where he believes that he can now do something about it, and he is acting. I do not anticipate that Donald Trump is going to back off. I do believe he will sit down with other nations to strike a deal which he believes is more fair for the United States. But if nations are not going to try to negotiate something out to come to a compromise of some sort, I am not surprised that he's escalating the situation with China. And I personally believe he will continue to do so because he believes he has the leverage of the U.S. economy to do it. So it becomes, who has the greatest tolerance for this pain? Is it the United States or is it other countries? Someone is going to fold at some point. I don't think it's going to be Donald Trump.
Okay, Adam Schwartz, is that a fair way of looking at it? Someone's going to fold at that some point of time, but people are going to turn around and ask, hey, why do we need to take the pain for what the US is doing?
Yeah, I think it's not really an appropriate way to kind of consider the issue. I mean, let's be clear, tariffs overall can be an effective tool when used in quite a surgical way for trying to bring in sort of investment, particularly on manufacturing. And actually, we saw that under the Biden administration, use tariffs quite carefully. But even from the perspective of somebody who believes in the kind of mantra of protectionism, this kind of blanket level of tariffs is really utterly nonsensical and goes completely against the kind of proven economic theories of the last 100 years, where blanket high tariffs across the board from America have actually proved to have the exact opposite desired effect. And I think, the market reaction we've seen have really shown that actually these tariffs by Trump are an astonishing act of not only national harm, but global harm as well. But I think really if you want to understand, why is Trump really doing this? It's not actually because he's trying to improve the deficits, even though it's something he's talked about for a long time. The reality is that these tariffs give Trump a huge opportunity for corruption. And actually, that is the reason why he's doing it. And simply you have to look at the fact that governments everywhere and companies are all coming groveling to Trump, begging for some kind of exemption or alleviation from the tariffs. And Trump loves that. Trump loves people to be groveling at his heels, begging him to do some kind of action for their favor. It's all part of the kind of quid pro quo approach that he has. And it's utterly reckless, and it's going to cause the most devastating harm to not only the US, but actually the global economy, really for very little harm. And in reality, Trump is not going to cause huge amounts of investment back into the US because America is demonstrating itself to be a completely unreliable partner. And which company or government is going to try to integrate their economies or businesses back into the United States when America is proving to be a completely unreliable partner and is capable of taking such extreme action?
Uduja, I'd like to respond to that because there are serious questions about what really is driving all this. Is it just Trump wanting everyone to come groveling, bargaining? And he said that there's room for negotiation. But the point is this, that, can we be looking at, endangering global economies? Because there are fears being expressed of inflation, of recession, and what all of this is finally going to lead in terms of not just the United States, but the whole world.
You are right. Fear is the word. What Trump is doing, he has introduced a wonderful word we never hear in international diplomacy, and that is called reciprocal. Reciprocity. I have been saying this for a very long time, that we as a nation, America as a nation, India as another big democracy, the democracies of the world will have to begin demanding reciprocity in what you do. That's what he has done. He has said, as Dan said, it is the deal to make, here is the tariff, you make a deal with me, and Vietnam is imposing 46% tariff. Canada puts 250% tariff on milk and eggs, which we didn't even know about it. What is happening right now is that Trump is bringing forth the truth and reality, which is rather shocking for everybody, that you can't have a unilateral insulting of the market or taking advantage of the market like United States is. So we are very proud of United States being the largest market. All he's saying, pay me. If you are becoming a big country, if Canada, for example, is a big country because it's a $390 billion trade relationship with the US, which puts it in G7, although it is the 10th largest economy in the world today. So Canada owes its large size or global domination or global recognition, not domination, because of United States, so does Mexico. But I want to insist on one simple element. Trump is recognizing the reality that manufacturing has to come back to America. That is a subject matter which is still open, out in the open, because you do not know where will these industries go, whether it will come to America, whether they go to Brazil, go to Vietnam, go to India, or whichever country they find which has a lower tariff rate.
Well, I suspect it won't be Vietnam because Vietnam perhaps is the highest amongst those tariffs that we saw Trump release the other day. But
I believe Vietnam did talk about that we will. I read the news. These days, news travels like faster than the speed of lightning, if I may say so. So Vietnam offered to reduce its tariff significantly. And 50 countries have already said, let's talk about it.
All right.
And
Well, how far will that
important.
really be
It's
successful?
time
And if they do
to
that,
talk about it.
well, if they do that, then will the manufacturing actually leave Vietnam and come to the United States in the first place? And what is the idea behind doing that is a big question indeed. But PK Basu, in the midst of all this, back home here in India, we're looking at 12 lakh crores of investor wealth that's been shaved off. And that's not a small amount. It's a huge amount. At the end of the day, it's the common man, is the middle class investor who's perhaps been the worst impacted by this. And there is, of course, perhaps every possibility that this could just be the beginning of a long series of such crashes that we're looking at.
I don't think it's the beginning of any series of crashes. If you look at the market, it is down over the past 12 months, but it's still up over the last 24 months, over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, very substantially. So India's equity market has provided very good returns to domestic and foreign investors. And, it never goes one way. It's at some point there has to be some corrections occasionally, and we've just had about a 10% correction over the last few trading days. I don't think it's anything to tear our hair out about. But the important thing is that if you look at what Trump is saying, he is indeed happy to negotiate with everybody else apart from China, and Vietnam, India, even the EU. And Canada and Mexico are all quite ready to negotiate a mutual reduction in tariffs. Trump has said the baseline tariff rate is going to be 10%. And if a trading partner is willing to reduce its tariff, non-tariff, and other barriers to imports from the US, then the US will be willing to reduce the tariff rates. Now, with regard to inflation, the simple fact is that
what happened?
Oil prices were $80 a barrel on the day of the election. They came down to about $70 a barrel within a few weeks because of Trump's slogan of drill, baby, drill. And now, over the last week, it's come down to 63. I mean, if you look at Brent crude oil price is down to 63. The WTI intermediate is down to $56 a barrel. So there's been a substantial reduction in oil prices. Trump is right that there's been a reduction in fruit prices as well. And particularly because India has re-entered the rice market, for instance. India is a major exporter of rice.
Okay.
When India opens up its rice exports, it causes rice prices to come down. So, in fact, we've had a substantial reduction in food and particularly in energy prices, which is good for the world. It's good for India.
Okay.
Now, also, India is going to benefit because our key competitors in textiles and garments are seeing a huge increase in their tariff rates in the US.
Okay.
For the last 10 years, there's been a benefit. Actually, for the last 7 years, they've had a benefit relative to us because India's GSP benefits were taken away by Trump in June 2017. Vietnam and Bangladesh still have GSP benefits for their textiles and garments. And now it's been reversed. India is going to pay a lower tariff rate. So India's textile and garment
All right. Mr. Basu, I have to come in there. I want to bring in Dan on one important aspect, though. Dan, we are seeing pressure coming from the Congress. There's potential pressure coming in from citizens if prices do rise. But, several of the corporates and Wall Street, in fact, has started to speak out. We've seen JP Morgan Chase CEO, Jamie Dimon, Bill Ackman, hedge fund manager, as well as someone who's a big supporter of Trump. All of them have started talking about how Trump's tariff was weakening the market. Is there somewhere or the other a sense that all of this pressure that's coming in from different quarters is going to bear down on Trump? Or is he someone who's just going to look the other way? At least judging by his statements, that's what appears to be the case. At some point, will he have to give in to this?
I don't believe that he will because he believes that he's right. And in spite of what anybody is going to say to him, and look, there certainly is a lot of concern about what's happening with the stock market. But if you just take Donald Trump out of the mix because he's a disruptor and there's a lot of people who don't like him personally, put that aside for a moment and simply look at what he's saying. He's saying, is it fair that the United States has a 2% tariff rate and another country has a 25% tariff rate? How is that fair? And the answer is, it is not. So Trump is not wrong. The issue becomes now, how do you address it? And because Trump is a disruptor and the nature of who and what he is, he comes at you 100%. So to me, it is a game of chicken, which he believes he will win, as I said before. These situations can keep escalating. Remember, there's a lot of pain being felt by other world leaders. So they're going to have pressure on them. They're not going to just everybody blame Donald Trump. They're going to expect their leaders to respond in some way. And to keep going higher and higher with tariffs, not going to work.
All right. And, Adam, one of the interesting things is that even traditional allies of the United States, whether we're talking about Japan, Germany, Taiwan, and even allies such as Italy and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni are now talking about the heat coming in from these aggressive tariff policies. The question is, how long will this, hold out diplomatically? Because the way it's going, there's going to be a lot of diplomatic pressure that's building up on President Trump as well.
Well, this is, all part of Donald Trump's worldview, that he doesn't really view any other countries as allies because he only has a kind of America first approach, what I would classify as a Trump first approach in reality. And so really he doesn't kind of distinguish between countries in terms of values as America traditionally did, in terms of who do we want to support, who do we not want to support. I would come back to Dan and say, actually, Donald Trump is not correct when he says that America is repeatedly treated unfairly over tariffs, because actually most of the time when Trump claims that other countries have higher tariffs than the US puts on them, actually he's misconstruing the reality, and it includes things like VAT that we have in the UK. And of course, in America, there is all kinds of sales tax that are equivalent that he doesn't include in tariffs when he's talking about American tariffs. So I think in reality, Trump, has a very distorted view that most people, are kind of not used to. And, Dan is correct when he says that Trump is a disruptor. But ultimately, Trump is taking a kind of thuggish bullying attitude, basically saying, we're the biggest, we're the best, we will keep on escalating until you do exactly what we say. The reality is that kind of might is right world is not going to be healthy for anyone. And it's not going to encourage companies to ultimately invest in the United States, because companies want to invest in politically stable, fiscally stable economies and environments. And the reality is, when you have a very unstable environment, when you have a very unstable leader, that does not produce the kind of results that he's promising. And I would say, we've been talking about quite a lot that, America needs to return manufacturing. I'm not really completely convinced that actually Americans want to work in garment, factories, to be honest, like they did 50, 60 years ago. I'm not completely convinced they actually want to pay the kind of prices for those products that they did 50, 60 years ago. So I think ultimately Americans are going to face the realities, the hard realities that haven't been acknowledged by Donald Trump. And in the end, that I think is going to be a very difficult thing for Donald Trump and the Republicans to face.
All right.
Okay.
All right. PK Pasi, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think Adam is probably, not, he's not willing to accept the democratic result. To say that the United States voter has basically voted for an egotist and not for the policies that he's been advocating is, I think, a trifle unfair, to put it mildly. And the simple fact is that Trump has won 2 elections with the same policy approach. In fact, he's been very clear that he's going to impose tariffs on the rest of the world, because the rest of the world for 40 years has been running large bilateral trade surpluses with the US. And those countries that have surpluses with the US have tariffs, they have non-tariff barriers, they use currency manipulation in his view, and they have things like VAT. Now, it is a fact that VAT in Britain, for instance, is a tax on imports as well. So it's not as if it isn't.
Same as sales tax in America. Same as sales tax in America, which Trump doesn't
very
acknowledge.
much lower, and it's not national. Okay, it's very much lower than the VAT in the UK and the EU.
Okay.
So the simple fact is that there are many more tariff and non-tariff barriers, and it is a fact that the US has had very large deficits, current account deficits, consistently for more than 40 years. And that is what he wants to address, has been addressing politically since at least the late 1980s.
All right.
He is merely doing what he has said he will do, what he has told the electorate and been voted to do.
All right.
He is, now, the interesting thing is, we are now expecting some sort of big spurt in inflation.
All right, all right.
Imports only 20% of GDP.
Well, what will happen, in fact, I wish we had a crystal ball to gaze in and see what really the future is. The markets appear to be reacting in a certain way. Will this last? Will this actually benefit the US economy? What's the impact it will have globally speaking? All of these are big questions at the moment. I'd like to thank our panel for joining us. Dan Galtrude, Vibhuti Jha, Adam Schwartz, as well as PK Basu. There's some big breaking news coming in at the moment.